Chapter 20. Faux Spelunking. One cannot separate the spider's web from the way in which it originated. Neri Oxman. No idea who that is. I just like the quote. Well, now what? Said Ethan, looking where the cat had been seconds ago. Plan C, said Carl. The hell is Plan C? Your guess is as good as mine. Best move, back to the spider hole. Carl turned and fired a shot wide, intentionally missing the young Indian man in the dacha, but prompting him to withdraw himself. Aw, fam, come on now. Run! By this time, Carl was close enough to grab Ethan by the hoodie and half lift him off the ground. Legs like jelly, Ethan obeyed. In the Baba Yaga dacha, Ricky ducked back from Carl's shot. Ed managed to claw his way up the stairs to the exit. He wasn't in bad shape, but he had been banged up during the transition. Clever Ed said, Carl Marlboro, Ricky, not Cigarette Charlie. That's what Bob Treefighter with the peace pipe said. Sir, he's there with some kid in the hoodie and they're armed. Clever Ed sighed, looked out briefly. Where'd they go? There are tunnels up and down this runway, or waterway, or whatever it is. Ed peeked out, looked behind, and replied, How do we get out of here? It's not that far to the legs leaning against the wall, Ricky said, carefully tying his heavy winter coat around his waist. Clever Ed did the same. Okay, we got this. All right. At least it ain't as cold anymore, huh? Follow me. And they quickly made their way to the dark floor of the canyon runway area. When they reached the flat expanse, Clever Ed could easily see where scuffs and disturbances led to the cave Carl Marlboro and the hoodie kid had disappeared into. Ed stared at the hole in the flat expanse hemming the dark road. He looked around the twilight sky with his hands on his hips, then made a decision, said, Let's go, and began to hustle to the tunnel. Ricky followed fast after, only casting one look behind briefly to see a scene from another world that was mind-bending. He knew he couldn't stop to take it in just yet, but like a cloud of locusts, he saw a variety of shapes coming from a huge structure straight down the road, one that looked to be an inverted cone, a conch, a seashell, and it had a great spiraling opening, as the Baba Yaga dacha had, and out of that opening came more and more of the shapes. They were headed his direction. Ricky picked up his pace. Inside several seconds, he had made it to the tunnel. Sir, there's something coming. His voice echoed as they eased their way in, the light behind quickly growing dim. I don't know what's going on here, but Carl Marlboro does, and that Baba Yaga dacha we got here in is probably busted. Hey! A voice echoed from darkness ahead. There was now a bouncing light, very faint. You want to live! You listen to what I say! I can tell you are not those black-eyed cue balls. We're FBI! Clever Ed yelled back. There was a pause and a chuckle, and then the voice in the dark called out, A bit out of your element, yes? What do you want to do about it? I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked, he said. Io-Aoshima, an island in Japanese waters southeast of Hiroshima, had been overcome with cats for many years. The animals were introduced to handle the rodent problem and had done so quite successfully. Over the years, they'd become a tourist attraction. Meanwhile, the town itself dwindled into a shadow of its heyday, a literal handful of individuals remaining on the entire island, tiny though it was. The cats didn't care, and soon began to inhabit that town, only too happy to accept donations from tourists who had become international as the island's reputation grew. The cats, being cats, preferred to congregate near the docks where visitors came and fed them routinely, easing the difficulty of trapping small prey on the skinny 1-mile island. The smell of fish and cat urine at that location was profound. There were well over 100 lazy felines in varying states of sloth that afternoon, and it had been a day slower than normal. Only a trickle of tourists bothered to visit. In the midst of the main body of cats was an old fishing hut being reclaimed by the elements. On the side of the square hut bordered by the most felines, there developed a thin line of throbbing blue. It quickly expanded into an oval shape, drawing the attention of every cat in 20 yards. With no warning, a long-haired black monster jumped straight from the middle of nowhere into the center of the cats, and there was chaos. Of course, the monster was Slinky, but she came out with a hiss and a scream, and none of the animals on the dock saw it coming. The felines immediately defaulted into panic and became a mob of confused insanity. Slinky was caught up in the panic she helped create, and the domino effect of feline terror percolated through the village in waves as infinite cats put the afterburners on full blast and compounded their own fright, running into one another. Hisses and yowling noises made staccato feline activity into a war zone, and quite a few disagreements broke out among the locals. It was enough that Slinky managed to blend in, shooting off to some hidden point under a vine-covered shack and quickly vomiting. This was, perhaps, her fastest transition in and out of residence. Understandably, the lady cat needed a breather to catch her bearings. It would take her a week or so to find her place in the hierarchy of cats. Grouped as they were, they had not adopted the same level of territorial rivalry as is seen among neighborhood toms who insist on fighting one another in the small hours of the morning. At a certain threshold, many cats in one space simply learn to tolerate one another. Still, cats startle easy and are generally wary of strangers. This certainly described Slinky, even in her essentially domesticated state, and being feline, heed or no, it was Slinky's first prerogative to find her own territory where she could figure out how to eat and drink. She was a house cat, but the most home-centered of felines establishes boundaries. She was one of few, if not the only, long-haired animals on the premises, and so kept an especially low profile, becoming mostly nocturnal. Within a few days, she had enough confidence in the surroundings to make her presence known to local toms, which she did prominently. Several of them dimly recalled her entry into their domain, so occasionally the mere sight of her would send an unsuspecting cat into spasms. This was rare, though. There were many more than those who had initially seen her entrance, and new felines regularly made transit to the island by hiding on the boats of tourists anyway. So she was generally accepted by the clouder. In her feline mind, she would remember Carl and his kindness, but as in other times where the feline became displeased with her owner, it would take her a while. It would be many days before some catty thought triggered natural feline determination requisite to open a rift on the island and make her way to Carl in that thick-aired place. Even so, there would be treats when she did. This, Slinky was sure of. Likely, a suggestion of treat recollection in a day nap would eventually compel her. Someday, much later than the present one. Today, there were toms in abundance across the island, and so would the feline take her ease on cat sabbatical in Japan. "Just listen up," Carl said. "First, get down here quick. I could have shot you 10 times already. I did not, because you are not ache people. All hell is about to break loose behind you if you are in range. They will suck you right into a spaceship and do things to you that you do not want to think about." "Can confirm," Ethan added. Clever Ed and Ricky hustled toward Carl and Ethan. Ed was saying, "So we have questions." "As do I," said Carl. "Starting with how you got in my dacha and did what you did, but we have more immediate concerns." "We ripped down all the siding and the sun turned it on," Ricky said. Carl paused a moment. "I see. Can you get that light out of my face?" Clever Ed gently pushed Carl's gun to the side. Carl obliged, but glaring, continuing, "Listen, up this tunnel about another 200 feet. There is a wide chamber with a spider big as a car. We shot it good and burned its web, but as you can see by the darkness behind, the fire did not continue. However, there is also a dearth of bald-headed, black-eyed Renfields, so something must have happened. I do not know what. I also do not advise we go back that way. Seriously, a spider the size of a car." In the shadows, Clever Ed's eyebrows shifted visibly. "You want to go check it out? Have my gun." And Carl turned it to him, butt first. Ed took it slowly. Why don't I just point this at you instead and have you come outside to help me get out of here?" "Well, if you go back that way, you're going to get sucked up into some cucumber-shaped demon alien ship, and they are going to flush your system with mind-altering drugs and hook you up to a machine to terrorize you using the emotional energy that results to generate some sort of corporeal spacesuit allowing extra-dimensional embodiment. Alternatively, if you go ahead of me, there is massive spider, and there might be few ache guys yet alive. You can do either one to satisfy yourself that I am not, in fact, lying, but I also do not recommend either one." Ed looked at Ricky. He looked at the skinny kid in the hoodie beside Carl, constantly waving a 9mm around like he hardly knew what it was. He felt an unwelcome thrill in his gut. Ed said, "Ricky, stay with them a second, will you?" "Sir, clever Ed, I do not think these men are lying." "I know, just..." And Ed continued deeper down the cavern. Behind, Carl lit a flare. Ethan said, "Why haven't they come in after these two yet?" "Either they know Jesus or the scent or whatever it is they can detect went cold when we got far enough inside. If that happened, it would be assumed a shift has occurred. No reason to pursue. I hope this is what has happened. Since they are a collective, they know what happened to the ship that exploded. It is possible they will send a group to assess the dacha where it lays. I'm not sure." "You!" Carl jostled Ricky's shoulder. "Yes? You're not Jesus." Ricky looked like he had tasted something he didn't like, but wanted to be polite to his host. "I'm from India. We have many, many deities." "You're from India." "Sorry." "You're from India," Ethan interrupted. "When I was very little, but I haven't been in USA since I could shave. To answer your question, sir, I have heard of Jesus. My faith follows Hindu traditions. There are many good things in Christianity. I am not a Hindu either, though I know more of this than your Jesus." "How about your boss, Clever Ed?" Carl continued. "Yes, sir." "He knows Jesus?" "No, I meant yes, sir. He's Clever Ed. As to the question, I don't know if he is Christian or not, sir. He could be agnostic. He does not like the government much, I know that, even though he's part of the government. He says we are all bastards or idiots." "Ha!" replied Carl. "Okay, well, we might be able to..." "What?" Clever Ed yelled this distantly and percussively. A few more exclamations came out of him, then several extraordinarily loud gun reports, panicked clambering footsteps, and hissing noises. "Okay," Carl said, and started running toward the noise. A distant bouncing light indicated Clever Ed. When he was about 20 feet off, Carl chucked the flare he had struck at the spider, or where he supposed it might be. He made contact. In fact, he'd thrown it right in the creature's gullet, which resulted in a horrid shriek, and the arachnid slamming itself into either side of the claustrophobic corridor, knocking sediment and old web down. Clever Ed yelled out, breathless, "So I'm gonna believe you!" And he wheezed. "All right, follow me. Give me the gun. There is an intersection point. These tunnels are like a grid. We get it right, we make the ziggurat." "Well, man, you got an extra gun for me and my partner?" Ed indicated Ricky. Still breathing hard. "Nope," said Carl, "but Ethan, the FBI man, he will be better with that." "Yeah," Ethan acknowledged and handed Ed the 9mm. Carl also provided another gun light from his backpack, and in a moment they continued down the chamber a good 30 paces. The spider writhed behind, but was not pursuing. Carl stopped, looked at a point in the wall, and pushed. It slid aside like drapes of metal that had descended to rust, revealing a triangular opening barely a man's height, but which widened out a little past the shoulders in overall width. Through the entry, it stretched high into darkness. It was narrow, but there was plenty of headroom. Only the entry required crouching. Carl looked inside, pointed the gun around, and said, "Found it. Okay, Ed, take the back. I will take the front." He ducked into the corridor and then stood. "Guess we are the lunch meat," Ricky muttered to Ethan, then followed after. Ethan said, "What?" and did the same. Clever Ed kept his gun pointed at the spider, now a good 70 feet behind, and not enjoying what the burning flare was doing to its insides. This new corridor was barely wide enough to proceed in single file. As he came under the drape-like covering at the back, Clever Ed straightened up and said, "We going to see any more spiders like that?" "It is the largest I've encountered," said Carl. "I hope we do not see any more. I don't know. They're in some tunnels, they're not in others. The deeper we get, the fewer, by which I mean the closer to the ziggurat, the fewer there will be." "Well, that's a relief." "You won't ever be able to leave these holes, though," Carl continued. "You or your man Dicky. These tunnels, you cannot under any circumstance get near the other creatures, the ones who appear to be aliens, such that they know you are here." "Why not?" both FBI agents replied in unison. "I can't do that," in terms of dialect. "That is why I was asking about Jesus," Carl replied. Ethan spoke up from the middle. "Those alien things are like demons or something. You speak the name of Jesus on them and they're gone, if you really mean it. But the black eyes, the ache people, they let the demons in. It's not so simple with them, you feel me?" "It's like an exorcism," Carl said from the front. Some of the possessors grip the spiritual matter, or whatever it is they cling to, more strongly than others. The slimes in the alien spacesuits, they pop like a zit, but you get one in your mind and as a human in your soul, everything change. God is gentleman. You choose against God, God lets you do this. Angels, demons, they have different rules. Ricky turned over his shoulder and said, "That's like what that man Paul and the Russian woman Katya were saying." "Yeah," Clever Red replied, and after a second clarified, "There was a case last year in 2021. "Damn, fam, it is 2022 already," Ethan mumbled. "It is indeed," said Ed. "Has there been a war or excuse me. "It is indeed," said Ed. "Has there been a war or something?" Carl asked. Clever Ed stopped and looked to him at the head of the line in the darkness, then turned back to cover the rear. "As a matter of fact, yes. Russia invaded Ukraine." "Ah! The flood," remarked Carl. "The what?" "There was a flood in the Sea of Knowledge," Ethan clarified, "right?" "Yes, Ethan." Clever Ed screwed up his eyebrows, then returned to his initial thought. "Paul and Katya said something about that too, except for them it was COVID." "Well, maybe, I don't... Well, what I was saying, they talked about the Greys you referred to. I haven't seen one, but I believe you about getting sucked up. Katya said you can pop them like balloons with the name of God. You can pop them in their thousands. She also said something about big old bees the size of a jet, space bees." At the head of the line, Carl abruptly stopped, said, "Hold on a moment," then looked both ways down a branching tunnel. In a moment he leaned back, said, "This way," and pushed out, then left. As they came into this new corridor, he resumed, "I have not heard of space bees. As to destroying the Greys, it is not you who destroys their flesh suits. It is God through you, who becomes available by faith. Grace through faith is the formula. You ask in Christ, you repent, you admit you mean it when you get a chance in front of people. You mean it, you really mean it. Then you have faith. This changes you at spiritual level. Think of spirit like DNA, but metaphysical. Think of salvation like a firewall on your spirit software. Now, different rules apply to you. Now, only another human can touch you. Another who has authority, not these damn things." Carl made a vague gesture in the darkness. "I'll admit it sure is more compelling coming in such circumstances, but..." Deafening bangs jumped out of Carl's 45, and a spider like a large dog lost its face. It had come from the direction they were headed. Carl aimed the light further down the tunnel, shapes retreating ahead, but not far enough for his tastes. He said, "Watch out, Clever Ed. Do you see any other way?" The other way? It looks clear to me." "Okay, let's go the other way." And Carl walked back around to the front. They had almost returned to the skinny triangular passage through which they'd come when a spider's long leg crept out of it, thicker than a fire hose and followed by several others. The great spider had recovered from the flare and followed them into the tiny entry, squeezing its massive body in and coming sideways through the crevice. "God help us!" Carl yelled and fired, backing up quick. "The other way! The other way!" This brooked no argument. The four men ran back the way they had come, Ethan screaming, I need a stick or something!" This passage was much more untamed than the other, and it was thick with web. Carl stopped abruptly. "Ethan, top pocket of my pack! There is one last flare! Burn the web!" "I got the big guy," said Clever Ed, aiming down the way they had come. Ethan had the fire burning about the time the large spider managed to pull its way from the smaller chamber into the larger, with no small amount of effort. Now it was coming their way fast. They retreated into the fire, but the flames would burn through the web quick. Ahead of them, dozens of lesser arachnids squealed and retreated from the heat. Behind, the larger spider advanced cautiously, batting at the fire with forelimbs, trying varying ways of pursuit. They went down the corridor in the middle, contending with a vortex of hot pain and covering their mouths with any part of their clothing they could to offset the smoke. Carl said as loudly as he could through the sleeve he had in front of his mouth, "What did you see the first time, Ed, when you went to call my bluff?"
20 ache guys wrapped up like house flies in this massive son of a bitch sucking the juice out of them. Half of them was powder. I don't think the spider even got full. Saw me when I yelled like an idiot and shot it in the head.
Screeched the giant behind as they backed into the cave, burning web as they went, keeping 30 feet between them and the spider, which was not nearly enough. The spider would advance and retreat in spurts. Ed or Carl would take a carefully placed shot. The eyes and mouth were sensitive, but the chitinous exoskeleton of the beast was quite thick. It was soft in the abdomen, however, but that was a hard shot with the brigand facing them. Ethan yelled from the front, "Carl, this wall! It's that crumbly stuff!" Carl looked over his shoulder back at the spider, then replied, "Is there a way in?" Ethan held out the flare. "Yeah, square entry. I can see the glowing bugs." "Don't touch the walls. Go!" Ethan and Ricky ran in. Carl turned to Clever Ed. "I've been there with the cat. There is an entry point. Never seen a spider. Try not to touch the walls. Go!" He fired once more at the spider as Ed followed the others, then ran in himself, feeling relieved to get out of the flame. The spider found the spot they'd fled to quickly, but when it went to follow, its legs sank into the walls, and it made shrieking sounds as those same walls sucked the massive arachnid into them, splitting the creature in two and drawing in the portions of its anatomy that had been broken. A wicked stench permeated the space after that, and a variety of thick, viscous fluids remained. "Okay, fam, the walls didn't do that last time," Ethan observed. "It can differentiate, I think," Carl replied. "It is smart. Different responses for a cat, a man, a spider, a fly." "Nobody touched the walls, did they?" "I sure didn't," said Ethan. "No," said Ricky. "Okay, so that keeps the spiders out, I guess. I knew there is some kind of infrastructure this way. The creatures use it. If you touch those walls, generally it sends a message throughout said infrastructure, like the web of the spider, but so much more sophisticated. It is some sort of granular nanomachine technology, computer sand. I suppose we are not to be killed by them, at least. I guess we are like livestock. It would make sense. But we are very far from the Conch Ziggurat. It will take a long time to get there, and frankly, I'm not perfectly sure of the way from this vantage point." "Why are we going there?" asked Ed. "Wait, fam, I got an idea," Ethan interrupted. "Those dark-eyed guys like Buford had weird guns. Now the big spider's dead. We should go get those weird guns." Carl looked at Ethan, then Ed. "This is a good point. I will tell you on the way, Ed, why we must go to the ziggurat." Carl immediately made good on that promise, quickly relating the veritable saga he had told Ethan. It was about a 10-minute hike the way they'd come, and the spiders had been startled far down the tunnels, everywhere they'd been. There was a tense moment when they came out near where the first connecting tunnel was. The spider's hairy body had lost pieces as it squeezed through, chasing them. Other bits of dead spider were strewn about the first tunnel all the way to the creature's nasty lair. Nothing had followed in from the tunnel's exit, thankfully. So Carl's suspicion was confirmed one way or another. In the tunnels, whatever method those in the cylinders used to perceive an unprotected soul, those methods were stifled. They did indeed find loose weapons. In particular, those of the Ache men were impressive. They used a sort of energy that required a charge period rather than replacement of cartridges. The output was a sonic beam fired in a pulse with enough force to crush in a wall like a circular bludgeon of destruction. Imagine an invisible bowling ball. The weapon did lose power with distance, though, and was pretty useless past 200 feet. There were in the lair no less than 15 Ache grinners, as many as 20, like Ed assumed. They were mostly in states of decomposition, metered by the spider's hungry sucking at what fluids remained in them after their possessors fled. Interestingly, the original path they had come down toward the motorcycle had caved in entirely. That way was inaccessible directly, unless Carl knew a way around. Noticing it, he realized the loss, quipping, "Well, I did not think I would see the motorcycle again anyway." At length, they determined to take their chances where the alien things were, hoping Clever Ed and Ricky could be protected if they were noticed, but that effort was likewise obstructed. When they got back where they'd been, the cubicle entry with the sand computer walls had disappeared. They'd indeed found the right location. Bits of spider and burned web indicated as much. But the little square hole with crumbling sand-like walls, it was simply no longer there. They looked at one another and were lost for a moment before deciding to continue the direction they had scared the lesser spiders. With everyone armed, the arachnid threat wasn't quite as dire. They continued in this way for several thousand feet down the second tunnel in from the first. From their present orientation, the tunnel array was rather like the diminishing wedge represented in the symbol for Wi-Fi, only with thread-thin connecting arteries between the diminishing arcs of the symbol for Wi-Fi, of the symbol. A wide arch at the top, the dot of the conch ziggurat, the point at the bottom. The sonic guns made short work of the smaller spiders. Thankfully, very few remained after the fires. As they continued down the stone tunnel, Carl had related most of the history that led to the present situation. Clever Ed said, "So the cat is totally out of the picture then. Who knows? She will check where the nexus points are eventually. She will get bored and do her rounds. There are hundreds of points, maybe thousands. A cat's cradle, excuse the pun. Odds are we will never see Slinky again." Carl's voice sank briefly as he said this, but he continued before anyone could comment on it. "Those cylinders, they can go back, and at the conch ziggurat where are Genevieve and Chloe, who is Claire, there are many cylinders. One could be commandeered. At least I think so. Ethan managed it." Ethan related his own episode, sparking a lively discussion about angels when he came to the portion regarding Malkuthal. He was about to give his theory on the matter, but was interrupted. One of the Ache men had found a side passage, managed to survive the spiders, and had crept through it. It was further down the tunnel, and he had a very difficult time of it, being pushed so far that controlling energies had trouble manipulating him. There had been quite a few of their minions lost to the spiders. It was their benefit to recover whatever they could. When the Ache Man finally made it out the other side, he crawled from a skinny connecting tunnel covered in blood and arachnid components. This happened 30 feet ahead of Carl's beam. The Ache Man turned, brought his own weapon to bear, but Clever Ed beat everyone to the shot, putting one right between his eyes. Clever Ed preferred traditional firearms to the weird guns. The man fell, and the corpse shook into dust quicker than any of them. Abruptly, there was a green flash, and a spherical blob of evil rose from him and headed to the wall. The wall flashed purple and turned into the crumbly material as a square-shaped corridor developed from nowhere, one filled with glowing creatures on the ceiling. It remained open afterward, and flies came buzzing out. "This must be what we saw earlier." "Sorry. This must be what we saw earlier," said Ricky. "His life force." "That wasn't his life force, son. That was the demon riding him like Yakuts on reindeer," Carl corrected. "You know this." "Did you not listen to Ethan and I? It is immaterial. We have a question now. Do we follow it in before it closes like the last one or not?" "I say we risk it," Clever Ed replied. "Well, let us go then. Just do not touch the walls." And Carl led the way.